Andrew Armstrong was born in England and immigrated to Montreal at the age of 6 in 1960. Despite living with dyslexia, Andrew never let it stand in the way of his goals. His determination and resilience have led to a highly successful career in the Canadian Coast Guard, where he played a pivotal role in policy development for the 150-ship fleet. He also served as the National Director of Operations for the fleet and managed the National Emergency Operations Center, and concluded his career as the National Coordinator of Marine Security for the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympic Games. In retirement, Andrew continues to lead a very active life as a volunteer first responder, on-call firefighter, yoga instructor, doping control officer with the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports, and international technical official with Triathlon Canada. Today, Andrew Armstrong has graciously agreed to share his inspiring story with us. Hi, Andrew, and welcome to the Market Red Podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So, as far as dyslexia goes, can you tell us what your early school days were like as you kind of dealt with that challenge?
I went to school quite early in England. I was probably in school at age 4. I don't remember much other than the big kids running out the door and jamming the door into the back of my ankle, and that hurt a lot. I do know that when I came across on the boat, starting school in Canada at 6, I already knew my 13 times tables. So whatever that said about either my dyslexia or the English teaching system. And then by the time sort of grade 3 came about, my parents had already, I don't know if testing was available at that time in the early 60s, but I had changed schools and I was on my way to a private school, St. George's of Montreal, which overall was a fairly good experience. I do remember my grade 4 principal trying to, in the middle of the year, put me back into grade 3 and me hiding in the washroom until and having a mass search for me while I did it. My report cards were always lazy, doesn't pay attention, is disruptive in class, that type of thing. I guess what they found I was lazy was they would ask me a question and I could respond very easily. They would put a piece of paper in front of me and all of a sudden I became mute. I'm very lucky in that I can read well. My writing and my arithmetic is not very good, but I can actually read and absorb a lot. My brother-in-law was completely, couldn't read, really couldn't do the writing or anything else like that. So I survived high school and elementary school. But the teachers really, none of them had any idea what was going on with me. And it showed for some of them. They would tell my parents how brilliant and intelligent I was. My parents rolled their eyes because they knew better. And then my report card would be lazy, doesn't apply himself, disruptive, yada, yada. So, but overall, it wasn't too traumatizing, I guess, traumatizing.
So when was it finally recognized as dyslexia?
I guess it was about grade 3 when I started to change schools. So I was in a school out on the West Island of Montreal for grade 1 and 2, came into Montreal at a public school, which, to give you an idea of what it was like, the playground had a white line down the middle, girls on one side, boys on the other. And the fun thing they used to do was the boys would all get up and the girls would all get up and they'd throw the two people they thought were in love together at the line, right? Because you were not allowed to go into the girls' side and the girls were not allowed to go to the boys' side. So that's the kind of modern progressive education that we were doing. But from there, I went to St. George's School in Montreal, which was a private school. Not for problem children in particular, but just known for its somewhat unorthodox or advanced or whatever education processes. So it was about that time that I was, quote, diagnosed. And then I do remember a series of interviews with a psychologist when I didn't turn out to be emotionally disturbed. They then started to interview my parents, which went over like a lead balloon, because my parents were saying there's something wrong with him, and the psychologist couldn't find out what was wrong with me. So, and I started therapy after that. There was a Dr. Kirshner in Montreal. He was actually one of the founders, actually, of the Dyslexia or Learning Disability Association of Quebec. And he was treating children who he thought had a lack of hand-eye coordination. So I probably went through about 5 years of that, bouncing balls, doing circles in opposite directions with hands and all sorts of like that. Whether that had any benefit to me, I really don't know. But I was doing that sort of anti-learning disability therapy, right?
So it didn't have anything to do with reading then. It was more about trying to see it as a physical disability?
Yeah, I remember being told that my problem was a lack of fine motor control in my hands. Yet I was a classical violinist. So my left hand was doing all sorts of fancy things, but my right hand could not do cursive writing. As I say, you put a piece of paper in front of me, and it remains true to this day, I'd become mute. I can talk a lot. As a sailor, I can tell tons of stories, but writing it down kind of slows me down, and that that is was and is an issue.
It certainly seems like dyslexia is the kind of thing that will affect you for a lifetime and really can affect your self-esteem and your confidence at a very early age, and that continues on until you find a way to kind of get past that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was the class clown, which may be something that is typical, disruptive. I also happened to be fairly good at sports. I was the goaltender in both hockey and soccer. So it was, how nerdy and geeky are you, and that sort of thing. So the class wasn't too bad at me personally with children. I do remember them all being completely blown away. I did what they call not aptitude tests. They have the SATs and the ATs, which our school really groomed people to go to the United States universities. And I took the AT into physics. And we had done very little physics, but I got the book and I read it and basically memorized it. And then they gave me multiple guess questions so that the answer was there. I didn't have to write it out or anything else like that. It was just to color the box. And I scored quite high on that. And everybody, they were astounded. I wasn't particularly, but they were. So, I guess my peers had an opinion about, where I was going to go and what I was going to do. Whereas I didn't really feel that, not too much anyway. I wasn't, sitting in the corner all alone or being made fun of continually. So, as I say, the school was good. It was generous to me.
So how did you finally overcome it?
And this may be a question for later. I found my passion. After graduating high school in Quebec, grade 11, which it was then, no mark really over 50%, because that was allowed, except bizarrely written French, which was 75, the one that was out of 50s. I spent a year at CEGEP at John Abbott College out in West Island, basically going to organic chemistry in the morning and gambling my lunch money for the rest of the day. And then was asked, because I had applied to the Canadian Coast Guard College the year before, got no answer, And then I was asked if I would like to join in September. I said yes, I did. And from there, I think that was my passion. I didn't necessarily know it. But the other thing was everybody was doing a different subject that they had never, ever done before in their life, right? So seamanship, tying knots, marine engineering, navigation, celestial navigation, naval architecture, marine law. Sailors like to say we know very little about an awful lot, as opposed to a PhD, which knows an awful lot about very little. And I think that diversity of learning was my passion. The other thing with that is when you have a written exam in that, most of it is where are you, write down the numbers that you need to find out what the stability of the ship is. It wasn't a long essay about how good an author T.S. Eliot was, or what your opinion was. Right? So that helped a little bit as well. I went from my barely passing Quebec to 4 years at the Coast Guard College in the top 3 of my class overall.
Wow.
Do I know why? Not really, but I'll say find my passion. Because then you will do the work that you need to have it done to get to where you want to go.
So that was the inspiration ultimately.
Yeah, little did I know, but yes.
But you must have had to take steps to get there. And I mean, in terms of where you started as a kid, where you couldn't read at all, to at least being able to recognize the words, to understand what they meant, to be able to write an exam. That's a pretty big chasm.
Yeah, I was quite able to read. Now, I frequently turn words, completely inside out and backwards. But I can read the books and I absorb that information, right? Once it's not, the classical, all the letters jumble up all the time. That doesn't happen for me. So I'm lucky in that extent. But expressing that, as I say, as anything other than an oral way is almost impossible. So every exam we wrote in the Coast Guard College started at the head of the exam, 20% will be deducted for neatness. So I started writing out of 80% every time I started an exam, right? But also it was the assumptions of the nautical trainers were different. They expected you to know it. They didn't expect you to know it beautifully, if you know what I mean. It doesn't matter how crudely you got the answer out. As long as you got to the answer, that's how it worked. And to be honest, when I joined my first ship as a young officer, well, no, not even then, as a cadet, when I was on my training, the degree of functional illiteracy amongst the sailors is probably way beyond the norm for the Canadian population. Young people my age at 21 years old, completely illiterate, right? They were signing their checks to the next. One of the guys in my class was a Nova Scotian who had been in the same one-room schoolhouse from grade 1 to grade 12. And that was his education level, right? So it was diverse population.
So for you then, it's much more about writing. So in that case, when you talked about your career in the Coast Guard and really not having much of a need to always have to be writing things down, that must have helped. Like you chose the right career, right?
Yes. I mean, we had to do a logbook, but mine was painfully printed quite slowly because if I made a mistake, I had to cross it out, initial it because it's an official log, for law and everything else like that. So we had a rough log which nobody could read, but I could translate into the the good log at the end of my watch. But for the most part, it was bearings and positions and latitude, longitude, and that sort of thing. The happenings of the boat, the different courses, right? Um, I lost the privilege of going to sea after about 12 years because I'm should wear glasses, but it's short distance now, so and I've had an operation, so I can wear without glasses. But we had to have 20/20 uh, uncorrected, and my eyesight failed, and so I went ashore. I wound up, surprisingly, in many of my jobs, writing policy. But by that time, computers had word processors, and then personal computers had come into place. And so the spell checker was there, right? The spell checker, I have it turned off on my phone, which anybody who sees me text knows. Um, but uh, spell checkers are great if they know what you're trying to say. I find common words like please, the word is accepted if you don't put the E, or if you do have the E. They mean two completely different things, of course, right? So read, reread, get my people to read my drafts and then do it like that. But computers allow me to do that frequently, to write and rewrite without actually having to be what is not painful, but is disturbing having to rewrite things. It just, I felt weird trying to write, and still do, right? So as a doping control officer, they 5 years ago they shifted to the tablet to do all the tick here, tick here, tick here. Thank God, because we had to do all the forms manually, and I had so many errors on those forms. I'm surprised there's any athletes who are still racing. But anyway,
Have you ever sought help to deal with the challenges that you're facing as an adult, even?
um, no, I can't say I have. I and this sounds a strange thing to do. I actually tried to teach myself calligraphy, which helped a little bit. Didn't last long because, as I said, it is painful for me to write that way. But no, I've done nothing deliberately to do that. When I'm preparing for any sort of presentation, um, I just read and read and read and read and read, so that I wind up memorizing presentations and facts and that sort of thing. When I was writing my exams on, let's say, ship construction, I had painfully written out the notes, the lectures that we got in the class, and then I would just read that book, 5 or 6 times before the exam. And so when I got the question, I would sort of go, thumb the page and go, oh, here's the answer in my notes, and I visually remembered the notes, and I write what that was, right? But I know, guys down the hall were rewriting their notes to study. That's not going to happen. Sorry. And so, yeah, I have not really sought any additional training. I guess I learned the tricks to work around it. Plus, I had enough people and events and things in my life that validated I wasn't a complete idiot. Right? Not school necessarily, but certainly my self-worth was changed at the Coast Guard College, because all of a sudden I'm the top of the class. And then I found at work, people used to come and ask my opinion, which shocked me continually about stuff. And to this day, I can't. I'll answer, but I have no idea why they're asking me. I suppose it's a good thing, but
Well, so you've like you said, you've managed to kind of find workarounds, and it sounds like a lot
Yes.
of people with dyslexia, that is how they operate. If you miss it in school, then you haven't got much choice, have you?
Right. Yeah. I, and I guess one of the things that bothers me a little bit now is that um, when they were doing it in the 60s, they knew sort of the learning disabilities and dyslexia existed. They were just starting to get their head around it and trying different therapies, like I say, that hand-eye coordination that I was doing with Dr. Kirshner. Um, why, 50, 60 years later, we're having the same issues really is a question that you know my parents complained a lot. I'm sure that's why I changed schools. That's why I wound up being in therapy. Um, in a way, it's a shame that parents still have to complain to get the attention. But,
Yeah, well, it sounds like they're getting a little bit better at recognizing it, but
yes,
the challenge continues, right? Of just
yes.
trying to make sure that children are properly taught. Um, so, do you ever tell anyone you have dyslexia? Is it something that you kind of openly admit that it's part of your life, or is it something that's kind of in the shadows?
Much more so now, uh, but certainly working for the federal government, which is what the Coast Guard is, they will accommodate a disability. Dyslexia is recognized as a disability. So um, I used to tick that box when I was applying for a competition, but 99% of the competitions are interviews, not tests. So I perform well. Um, I know when I had to do my language exams in French, they would offer for the reading French, they would offer um, re, to read the questions to me as opposed to me having to read them, right, as an accommodation, right. That was one of the accommodations that they were offering. I didn't need it, but yeah. So um, now I guess that I'm not working anymore. I'm just volunteering all over the place. I proudly admit I have dyslexia, or what I call when I'm texting a fat finger error. But because sometimes it's an A instead of an S or something else like that, and that's another reason why spell check doesn't work, because spell check tends to work from the first letter. And so if I type an A instead of a less as a starting, I get completely random words that have absolutely no meaning, even with my bad writing. Um, but that's only with my daughter and some of my closest friends. My wife says that when we were dating, she always thought I was texting her drunk at night because the words just didn't always match the way they were. And that's because I was letting myself down to be relaxed and let it go, because my fingers will, even though I have the words in my head and I know what I want to say, the fingers are going to different keys, not the ones that they should go to. I'd have to focus almost as hard as it was in writing to get that correctly, but with computers, not text, but with computers, I can go back and say, what the heck did I write? That was just garbage. And, it'll tell me, it'll show all the little red underlines all down the screen, and I can go fix that. It doesn't work quite so well on a phone or text, but, um, it's when I'm writing an email, I pay attention to it. When I'm writing a text to my daughter, she'll sometimes come back with 5 or 6 question marks going like, what are you trying to tell me, Dad? It's just like, anyway.
When your daughter was learning to read, what sort of a process was that for you?
It, uh, as I say, because I can read, it makes it much easier. My parents always read to me at night when I was a child, probably up till my father, I think, stopped when I was 11 or 10 because he'd put the book down where he finished and I'd pick it up and continue reading. So that when he came back the next night and he wanted to read the story, um, I'd already been like 5 chapters ahead. So that's why we stopped. But I could always I always read to my daughter, and um, when I'd stumble over a word because I got it wrong because of the words did jumble, not severely, but they did, I guess she just got used to it, right? I was quite, as I say, my brother-in-law had really severe dyslexia. I had dyslexia. So I was worried about my daughter when she was born, that she'd get it from the male side, but luckily she got the female genes and not the male genes for that side. And if you measure handwriting legibility, I'm sure my father had it. I'm sure my grandfather had it. They were both successful people, um, different education systems, different times. But I say, just on the basis of trying to read their illegible writing, they had the same issues that I did, I'm sure. So
I imagine if you had the opportunity, you'd love to be able to go back to school and be properly supported and properly taught.
oh gosh, yeah. Having, I had, as I said, the St. George's School was a fairly good environment, but none of the teachers really had any idea what they were dealing with me. They because they'd ask me a question, I'd answer it. They'd say, "Okay, here, put this on a paper," and I would write 5 words instead of the 200 that were required. Right? Um, I was disruptive, but answering the questions well. So they really had no idea what was wrong or what they were dealing with. My principal, when I graduated grade 11, recommended me for remedial education instead of going to the Coast Guard College. So they said, "You'll never survive."
And
My mother ignored that, but parents aren't always dispassionate about their children. So it's, they don't always see the things that the other non-parental units see, right? So
well, if you had a chance to be that parental unit, I suppose, and talk to your 8-year-old self, what would you say?
I mean, it's a silly thing to say to an 8-year-old, but they really do have to find their passion, and unfortunately, that's a life journey. So, um, but I think I'd also, again, it's a tough thing for an 8-year-old, uh, but explain to the people who need to know what the issues are. I mean, say, I don't see that, right? I don't see that number, or that number is backwards, or it's just changed 5 times, right? Because my teachers then didn't know. I'm not sure that all teachers now know whether a learning disability is part of a teacher's education at university. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Um, but it does take some specialist skills to do it, and I'm not sure that all teachers actually recognize the. And if we start talking about this, New Brunswick, for example, we're 170 teachers short for the start of school year next week. So recruitment, retention, money, special education and this all comes from taxes and yada yada yada. I mean, it's a complex issue. It's not just, oh well, they'll all learn, right? But I'm not, having the teachers to actually understand in the first place is probably the biggest thing. And so I think it's actually up to the children to try and explain as best they can to these authority figures. I see that it's a hard issue, but to explain, really what they're seeing or what they're not seeing,
Well, and perhaps for their parents and teachers to also try to recognize things.
Yeah. And, if you're a teacher if you're a parent and don't know that your child, know exactly what your child is having, it's hard for you to explain it as well, right? If the child can't verbalize necessarily what it is. But, this whole part of find your passion, if the kid likes kittens and that's going to be their motivation for 2 or 3 years, then let's work with the kittens. right? Maybe they'll become a vet, maybe they won't. But I mean, they will find the way they need to enjoy what they're going to enjoy. Right?
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you sharing your story and your time with us.
It's a pleasure. I'm quite honored that you asked. I appreciate it.